G'day there, it's Dave here, Dave Mills, with another exciting series. And what we're both looking at together is the slide about how to get the board right. Now, as a beginner, you might think, I'll never make this mistake, but believe it or not, even experienced chess players can get halfway through a game and realize they haven't set it up right. So ask yourself, is your bottom left square black? All right, is their bottom left-hand square black? Is your bottom right square white? And is their bottom right square white? Try saying that quickly. All right, cheers. Bye. All right, together we're having a look at this wonderful slide about telling us what are the ranks and files. Now, files are columns of squares running up and down the board between you and them vertically. So there's the A file, the B file, C file, D file, E file, F file, G file, and H file. And for ranks, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, and this terminology comes up all the time. And so you would say second rank or third rank or fourth rank, so on, eighth rank, seventh rank. And files, you'd say A file, B file, G file, H file, D file, E file. You get the idea. So every square has a name, a coordinate, H1, H2, H3. So every square's name is a combination of the rank, the file letter and the rank number. All right, bye. The four center squares we see in front of us are where the grass is greenest. It's where the knights want to be. It's where most pieces want to be. The king wants to be there in the end of the game. And what we see here with these four center squares is the most important squares on the chessboard. Now, beginners don't realize how important they are. All right. If in fact a beginner who focuses all their pieces on the center does a lot better than, say, a club player who likes to be wild and attack down the sides, because it is your high ground. It is where you build the castle. All right, and also it's where, you know, those two files, the D and E files, are the most important files, and the most important ranks in the middle game are 4 and 5. So I look forward to the next next discussion. Bye. Okay, everyone. Now we're looking at the piece value points, the value of the pieces, or the material, as it's called in chess. Now we can see, we'll start with the least to the most, and that's the lonely pawn there on the left. So obviously this applies to both sides, and there's a few, you might notice the slides have a few extra juicy points down the bottom. Now the pawns are worth 1. You could say $1. So if that makes it easier for you, and if you capture a pawn worth $1 and they recapture you, you've just swapped dollars, so there's no loss of material. Do you see how the points help you with exchanges and to work out whether you should exchange? Because there's a material count or a piece count that will help you know. Now, the knights are worth 3, and the bishop, notice this is the thing that trips people up, because people think because bishops are the same as knights, they're called minor pieces. Actually, they're worth 3.5. Now, I always say, and I'm going to give you a secret, the bishops are worth 3.5 when you have 2 of them. But when you lose one of them, they become worth 3. And they're obviously better in the end game than the knight, just in general, because they can go from one end of the board to the other. But also, generally, when you've got those 2 bishops together, they're worth 3.5 each. And that way it can put some threat, some importance to you that you don't want to lose your bishop pair. And it's worth going through a little bit of trouble to keep your bishop pair for the end. Now, the knights, on the other hand, so the bishops have something to lose, but I always teach the knights have something to gain. If you can get them on an outpost square in their half of the board, I always give them 3.5. So the knights have something to gain and the bishops have something to lose. Now, what is an outpost with a knight? An outpost with a knight is a strong square in their half of the board where they can't drive it off with one of their pawns. And one of your pawns defends it. So it pays to have pawns that are attacking their side of the board, all right, to build an outpost. So the pawns and the knights work together to form outposts, and they help by moving their pawns too far forward, and so your knight in the outpost cannot be driven off. So a knight in their half of the board that cannot be driven off is worth 3.5, and a bishop, unfortunately, if you lose the bishop pair, becomes valued at 3. And because that means the other colour, because bishops are trapped on the colour, is just a little bit weaker. And so that's why you can draw opposite coloured bishops. There's a lot of weaknesses with the bishop. So the bishop has something to lose, knight has something to win. Now for the heavies or the rooks and the queen. Look at the leap between the rook and the queen. But still, there are many positions where you'd rather have 2 rooks valued at 10 than a queen valued at 9. Now, the queen loves the open game. She loves the center. She can go anywhere on the board in a giant asterisk, a giant star, in 8 directions. And the rook can only go up and down, left and right, like a plus sign. So why have I spent so much time on this? So that you have a very good sense of things. Now, which is better in the middle game? A knight and a bishop or a rook and a pawn? Well, it's actually better to give up the rook and the pawn in the middle game and keep the 2 minor pieces. You can actually see that it's slightly better. But towards the end game, that's when the rook and the pawn start to sing. So the points vary depending on where you are in the game. And so that's it. That's all the time I'm going to spend on it. And so when you make an exchange, try and have at least the same points as your opponent or win points off them. For instance, if you capture their rook with your bishop, you've gained 1.5 points. All right. Take care. See you in the next slide. Bye. Hi everyone, and I am just, I always say rooks in the corners, and it's so true. When you are just about to play, check to make sure you have your rooks in the corners and they have their rooks in the corners. Okay, now there's something special about the rooks. They attack as many squares on the edge of the board as they do in the center. Normally, most pieces attack more squares in the center. But for the rook, because it's up and down, left and right, like a plus sign, can be just as strong on the edge as in the center. So there you have it. If you're trying to remember how a rook moves, just make a plus sign with your hands and you'll remember. All right, see you in the next slide. Bye. Knights guard the royals, rooks in the corners. Sing it with me. Rooks in the corners, knights guard the royals. Okay. Self-explanatory. Just make sure you've got 2 knights and they've got 2 knights. All right. Bye. See you next slide. Bishops by the royals, rooks in the corners, knights guard the royals, bishops by the royals. Very easy to remember. All right, we're up to the royals now. Okay, bye. Queen on a colour. All right, you can see that the square matches the colour of the queen. Okay, let's sing it. Rooks in the corners, knights guard the royals, bishops by the royals, queen on a colour. Fantastic. See you next slide. the king goes home. Okay, let's sing it. Rooks in the corners, knights guard the royals, bishops by the royals, queen on a collar, the king goes home. Alright, I think by now you're starting to get it. Let's do it one more time. Rooks in the corners, knights guard the royals, bishops by the royals, the queen on her collar, the king goes home. Alright, I think you've got it by now. Let's go to the next slide. Bye. Okay, we're up to the pawns. Now, if you remember my discussion on the ranks, we see the pawns are on the 2nd rank and on the 7th rank. Okay, that's a wonderful place to be for a rook or a queen on your opponent's side. So let's go over the song again. Rooks in the corners, knights guard the royals, bishops by the royals, queen on a collar, the king goes home, and the pawns are in front. I've got a terrible voice, but let's just quickly revise this. We can see pieces are on the 1st rank and on the 8th rank. We can see that the ranks are the horizontal squares going left to right, marked by the numbers. So the rooks for white are on A1, H1, or A8 and H8. Do you see how the coordinates work? The pawns always start on the 2nd and 7th rank. All right, I'll be right back. Bye. Castle Kingside. And this is my 2nd attempt at doing this audio because a giant plane flew over my head. And I'm actually doing this in my room, which has the best sound in the house. Now, castling, such an important power that the king has. The moment you move him, he loses it. The moment one of the rooks moves, it cannot be castled with, even if you move it back to where it came from. Now, chess is a turn-based strategy game, and one of the most important opening strategies is to castle, because what it does is it connects the heavies, the rooks, together. The Rook Brigade is one of the most important brigades, and it's usually the last brigade that comes together. Now, the Queen doesn't have a brigade, and the King doesn't have a brigade, but she can also mix in with other brigades. She's like the most powerful piece, so she can be all things for all people. Now, castling. I would like you as a beginner to repeat this. The king moves 2, the rook jumps over. The king moves 2 squares, the rook jumps over. If one of those squares is attacked by your enemy piece, your king cannot castle. You can't castle into a square that's being attacked. You can't castle through a square that's being attacked. It's like an invisible force field. And you can't castle if you move. So let's see how quick I can say it. Alright. Can't castle through check. Can't castle in check. Can't castle if the king is moved. Can't castle if the rook is moved. Alright. The king moves 2, the rook jumps over. Here we go again. Can't castle through check. Can't castle into check. Can't castle if the king is moved. Can't castle if the rook has moved. The king moves 2. The rook jumps over the king. Okay. Now, does that apply for the queen side? Yes. These wonderful Creative Commons pictures on WikiHow, they're absolutely fantastic. And but there wasn't one for the queen side castling. But here's the way of doing it. It's the king still moves 2. And the rook jumps over. The rule doesn't change. The only thing that changes is you're going towards the queen side. The king side starts with the king, the E file, over to the H, and the queen file is the D file back over to the A file, because it's determined by the half of the board that the royal is sitting on. So when you castle queenside, it's a bit slower because the queen has to move. All right, but still the rules apply. You can't castle in check. So if someone checks you, you can't castle to get away from it. So can't castle in check, can't castle through check, can't castle to a square that's checked. The king, can't castle if the king has moved, can't castle if the rook has moved. The king moves too, the rook jumps over. Then that applies to the king side or the queen side. There you have it. Listen to this audio, as much as you need to, and practice. Just remove all the pieces except for the king and the two rooks, and you practice castling. All right? And there you have it. I'll speak to you in the next audio. Bye! Well, there we go. The pawn in front of the king, the e-pawn, makes a dash. Now, if you remember all the different discussions we've had in this video, we know that the pawn has just moved to the 4th rank. How do we know that? Well, the king is on rank 1, the pawn started on rank 2, and it didn't move 1 square, it moved 2. So it's on the 4th rank. Now, when you're writing it down, you would just, with a pawn move, you don't go pawn to e4, you just go e4 because the pawn speaks for itself. Okay, you just write where it went, where its destination is. But we'll do a whole video on the annotation. But even from now, you should be starting to be able to work out the name of each square. Now, that would be called a king pawn opening because it's a pawn. It's a king pawn. And the first initial move that a pawn can do, obviously it can't expose the king to a check, so that would be pinned. But the pawn can move 1 or 2 squares. In this case, it's full range of 2 squares. And we can see just even here that it's freed up the queen and the bishop. And unfortunately, that king pawn is not defended by anything. So it's a loosey-goosey. Okay, so there you have it. Pawns move straight ahead, 1 or 2 squares at the start, but then once they've done their initial move, they can only move 1 square at a time. And it's a long way to the end, but that's one of the... When you get to the other side, you can promote to a queen. We'll look at that in a minute. All right, take care. Bye. Well, we can see here that pawns capture diagonally. And what I like about this is there's almost like a 2 pawns. It's like this is where I was, and I'm in the air, and then boom. It's like the pawn has done a WWF World Wrestling sort of bomb off the ropes onto the other pawn. It's like falling away from it. Yeah. Well, pawns capture diagonally 1 square. So they can move straight ahead and they can attack diagonally. Now, the square immediately in front of your pawn I like to call the head square of the pawn. And where it attacks is, I like to call out the arms on either side. Okay? And we can see, I sometimes call them sabers because I refer to the pawns as infantry. So your pawn is sabering diagonally there, 1 square, and that's enough to capture the pawn. Or it was also, when it was back on d4, it was also attacking c5. Now, if you can actually see that and work that out with the files and ranks, I'm very impressed. And how you might think that, it's the pawn can, after it's done as an initial move of 1 or 2 squares, it can't move fast. It can only go straight ahead 1 square. But many times pieces get caught and forked by the pawns. But pawns are the only piece that don't attack where they move. Pawns don't attack where they move. They can move straight, but they attack diagonally. All right, so slashing to either side diagonally 1 square. Okay, thanks. Bye. Pawn promotion, pawn promotion. Now, one of my favorite slides. Now, once the pawn gets to the other end, it can promote to a queen, typically, but it can also promote to the other pieces. It can't promote to the king, to another second king, and it can't promote to itself and start working its way back down the board. That'd be weird. So the queen is obviously the most powerful piece, valued at 9. And we can see that we can expect that that's how most people promote. Now, sometimes under promotion is very powerful into a knight, a rook, or a bishop. Can be exactly what you need to prevent stalemate and a checkmate. So, but just typically promoting to a queen causes the opponent to resign because they're down now 9 points. And that can be a bit insurmountable. And so, love the word insurmountable. Okay. All right. I'll be on the next slide. Bye. Oh, this has to be one of my favorite slides, and it's another pawn slide. So this trips up beginners all over the world. This is sometimes referred to as the secret chess rule. It's not really a secret. And I'm going to tell you everything you need to know so that you can play it, so you can decide whether you're going to play it, so that if your opponent plays it, it's not a surprise, and so that you can surprise your friend with the history behind it. Okay, the secret move is called en passant. The en passant, it's a pass. It's a move where one pawn tries to get away with passing the other pawn and denying it the chance to recapture you. You see, many years ago, pawns couldn't move 2 squares at the start of, in their starting position. They could only move 1 square. Just like after their initial move, they can only move 1 square. So to speed the game up in many years ago, to speed the game up, they in Europe, they decided to give the pawn 2 squares. Now, this dramatically sped up the game. It allowed the game to become engaging and dynamic, and the fight from the start, it was really transformative. It was amazing. But then they discovered, wait a minute, I've just denied the advanced pawn, the chance to capture me because I've cheated him. I've raced past his ability to capture diagonally. So what they did is they came up with the en passant rule, the exception rule. So if you skip past their pawn with your pawn, only for the very next move, you have the right to capture. You have as though the pawn had only moved 1 square. So on the left side, number 1, we can see black, cheeky black skips past white's pawn. The queen pawn races past, and that white pawn is denied. But because of the en passant rule, for the very next move, that pawn, you see in the second half on the right, the pawn has the right to capture that pawn. But if you choose not to use it, then you lose the en passant power. So sometimes you see beginners, they go, oh, wait a minute, I forgot about that rule. And then later in the game, they try an en passant. But that doesn't apply. It's only immediately after. So repeat after me. The en passant rule is when they deny your pawn the right to capture, you do have the right to capture for the very next move. That's a real mouthful, but you get the point. The en passant rule is the secret rule of chess, but it just makes sense. They sped up the game by giving the pawn the right to move, and they put the en passant rule in there as to say, well, look, if this exception happens, and it happens more often than you think, for the very next move, you have the right to capture as though it moved once. But if you don't, then you've lost that right. And then the pawn just has skipped past and is now immune to capture by that pawn on either side. All right, take care. I will speak to you next slide. Bye. Well, this slide is very important, and I just am very grateful to WikiHow. Just go to WikiHow to play chess. Now, in WikiHow to play chess, there's all sorts of written examples as well, and you can download a template there, and it's absolutely the Creative Commons to share human knowledge is fantastic, and I found, that it's a fantastic source for diagrams, and I'm actually really bad at drawing. Stick figures are about as advanced as I can get. So it's a fantastic resource, so I can actually make this video. So beginners can, because masters start out as beginners. So we've all got to start somewhere, and I wanted to actually improve the quality of knowledge out there, so that you can get started with the right foot forward. Now, loose pieces get captured. This is so true. Notice how the king pawn, the e pawn, the names of pawns, traditionally were named after the piece they stood in front. So king pawn, queen pawn, bishop pawn, knight pawn, rook pawn. But to speed it up, it just went to coordinates. So the e pawn, the d pawn. Okay, so obviously white, previous move, since black has played two pawns and white's played a knight, uh, you know, uh, you would think that this example is correct. Is it correct? All right, because you think about it, white's played two and black's played two, so whose turn is it? It's actually white's turn to move. Okay, so the example is, the diagram is wrong. It's a trick diagram. Okay, so imagine that, because white starts first, whereas this example would be if white went second. Okay, so, but just in general, the concept of the picture is correct. Okay, so like let's say, white played the knight out and then black played the black queen's pawn to d5. And what's white? Okay, so say white started with the king pawn, and then black played, the queen pawn. Okay, well then obviously white has to respond to that threat. And also, okay, so let's say white played the king pawn, black played their king pawn only one square, the French defense. All right, white played the knight, and then black played the queen pawn, a French defense. Whose turn is it to move now? It is actually white's turn to move. So that it's important to actually, as Sherlock Holmes would say, eyes and brains, my darlings, and eyes and brains. It's very important to, in chess and in life, think for yourself, and and always check. Even in a place like Wiki, how to play chess gets things wrong. But just in the principle though of loose pieces getting captured is true. A piece does not defend where it stands. A piece is like an astronaut floating in the space, the squares. It needs to be defended by another piece, by another force, to actually survive. And in this case, the loose king pawn is being defeated, which doesn't make sense because it's white's turn to move. Okay, so I actually considered not actually not putting this in there, but I wanted you to sort of see as a perfect example in chess and in life and in WikiHow that you need to think for yourself, and eyes and brains. All right, next, I'll catch you next audio. Bye. Check the checks. They could be made. uh, There's three forcing types of moves in chess. Check, the threat of capture, or like the threat of check, checks, threats, and captures, right? They're very forcing moves, and you need to follow those forcing moves to the end and play the most forcing moves to keep control of the game. Now, we see in this position, okay, that black is being checked by the bishop, the light squared bishop in this case, and so how can you need to there's three different ways to defend the king. So let's just have a look here. Can the king move? Yes. Weirdly, the king's the king can move. The bishops move. So yes, the king can flee to f8. Okay, so the king can flee sideways, that dark square, and be fine. Okay. And could the queen go to d7 and block? Yes. But we know that the queen is worth 9 and the bishop's worth 3.5. So 3.5 from 9 is 5.5. Okay, so that's actually, that's not a really good trade for black. So can black block with the knight that's over on a6? No, the knight can only jump like a little L over in front of the bishop there. So no, it's when a knight is on a light square, can only move to dark squares. And the check is on light squares, so no, just looking at the colour the knight's sitting on, you'd say no. So you don't want to block with the queen, maybe block with the bishop. Now that is a very, very interesting thing. But your bishop wants to be further up the board like that white square bishop is. So, so that's really the two main options: block with the bishop or move the king. And it really just depends on the position here. Black's certainly at a disadvantage. He hasn't developed, or she hasn't developed and castled. So these are things that need to go through your mind. And a check is, it basically means an attack. The king is under attack. And it's one of the most forcing and powerful things. So you want to check all your checks. You don't want to leave a check out. And you want to do this trick where you go, well, look, if I could move 2 moves, let's have a look at the checks if I could move 2 moves in a row. And that will help you find checks and find checkmates that others who are learning miss. Even club players miss this all the time, and they don't know this trick. So imagine, check all the checks, but also check the checks if your pieces could move twice, and that'll open your eyes to the position. All right. Okay, I'll speak to you next audio. Only a few to go. Bye. Hey, I finally made it to the last slide, and oh my goodness, the birds in this neighborhood went crazy, and then another plane flew over my head, so I had to just sit here and wait 6 minutes. Okay, so there we have it. Checkmate the king. Checkmate means you've won the game, and it means that your attack check has, killed the king. The king is the bunny rabbit. The king is the MacGuffin. The king is the thing you want. Now, it's the thing, it's the ring. It's the thing everyone's chasing you about, and it's the end of the game. Now, we see here, let's have a look at white's pieces: a bishop, a queen, and a rook. And they're all playing a part. For the king to be checkmated, the king can't move to any squares. So look at how the rook is playing a part. It's blocking the A file. Straight ahead there. Right into the corner. The king can't flee into the corner. The queen is the one checking the king. And she's blocking, she's not just checking the king, but blocking his escape. Now finally, so the queen's checkmating the king. The rook is preventing fleeing to the corner. But what's the bishop doing? You need to get all the squares around the king to checkmate the king. And look at the bishop. The bishop that square is not reached by the queen. When the queen is on, this square here, it's blocking the dark squares, but It's not reaching the corner white square or the other white square next to the king, but the bishop is. Look at that. So if the king can't move, check his mate. Repeat that with me. If the king can't move, legally, of course, it's checkmate. Check his mate. If the king can't move, check his mate. The king can't move, check his mate. And so sometimes you can checkmate the king because their own pieces are trapping him in. So remember that the king has to be in a net, like a slippery fish. You got to catch him in a net. Okay, so there you have it. That's all the slides, and that's all of my discussions. And the last slide covers, the source material. It covers wiki, how to play chess, and it covers the logo has been on all the pictures, so a big hint. And also in the last slide, I cover the Creative Commons and just what a wonderful resource that is. And I highly recommend you go to Wiki, How to Play Chess, and read through the material there. And perhaps you could let them know one of their slides is wrong. That's a bit cheeky, but there you have it. That's what it's about. It's about sharing knowledge and improving. Okay, so take care, and that's what happens sometimes when graphics artists are not chess players. All right, and just finally, I would love it if you subscribe. I'm a new channel. Your support is so appreciated. Also, it just fills me with confidence to make more interesting and engaging film, and I'm just learning as I'm going. And so go down, press the doobie-doo, subscribe, like, leave a comment. It tells Google, hey, I appreciated this guy's work, and I will be seeing you soon. And let me know about what you think, and let me know how you've used this in your chess this week. That's the best way to learn. Learn and apply. Learn and apply. All right, you learn twice as fast if you apply what you learn. It's another one. All right. It's been such a pleasure, such an honor. I'll see you soon. Bye.